quarters since the third quarter. When the COVID-19 induced recession was first recorded in 2020. We do know that the whole world was on a lockdown in 2020, and Nigeria's economy dipped into a recession in 2020. So this is the seventh straight quarter of expansion. This growth seen over the last 2 years, we can say, can be attributed to the CBN's significant monetary expansionary policies, which have kept the MPR. It kept the MPR at 11.5% for a while, and also the various interventions to ease certain sectors. We saw the COVID-19 loan. We've seen different facilities from the Monetary Authority. But however, due to the sharp prices that we have witnessed in the last few months, as inflation hit 18.6% in June, the Apex Bank raised the interest rate to 14%, and inflation rate is already at, I think, a 17-year high of 19.64% in July 2022, the highest rate since 2005. So now let's go back. All you can see here is the analysis for the GDP data in July. Now let's go back to the GDP growth rate from 2015. In fact, we had to compile it because it's just a few months till the president leaves office, and let's see how he's done in terms of economic growth. Of course, he came in May of 2015. Before he became president, Nigeria's GDP was at 3.96%. I hope our viewers can see this on the wall. 3.96% in the first quarter, and it slowed to 2.35% in the second quarter. That is the April to June period. So President Buhari inherited a GDP growth rate of 2.35%. But don't also forget that over the past few years, at least I think from the later part of Obasanjo's days as president till Jonathan days, a bit, Nigeria's economy was around 5, 6, 7% growth. And at that time, the discussion was that we are having a jobless growth. So when President Buhari now came in, third quarter, the GDP growth fell to it increased actually, yes, it increased to 2.84%. Then in Q4, it came down to about 2.11%. Let's move over to 2016. 2016 here, the first quarter, Nigeria experienced a recession. In fact, a recession of 0.36%. Can we have that quickly? I don't know if our viewers can see it with what I'm seeing here. This is minus 0.36%. That was the first time Nigeria's economy grew below 1%. And in fact, the last time we grew below 1% before 2016 was in 1999, just a few months after democracy. There was a further decline. I beg your pardon, what you're seeing here in 2016 is minus. So minus 0.36%, minus 2.06%. In Q3, minus 2.424%, and in Q4, minus 1.73%. So in the whole of 2016, Nigeria was in a recession. Now, let's move over to 2017. The first quarter of 2017, we also recorded a negative growth, 0.52%. In the Q2 of 2017, that's in the second quarter, Nigeria exited the recession that we plunged into in 2016. Now, in Q3, we grew a bit, 0.83%. In Q4, Nigeria's GDP growth was 1.92%. Now, let's move over to 2018 very quickly. 1.95% here in 2018. It's moderated to 1.5%, and there was a time that there was a revision here by the National Bureau of Statistics. In Q3, we have 1.81%. In Q4, 2.38%. Is that it? In Q4, it's supposed to be 1.92%. Okay, that's for 2018, actually, 2.38%. In Q4, GDP was 1.92%. Now, let's move over to 2019, shall we, guys? In 2019, the first quarter, Nigeria recorded a growth of 2.01%. In second quarter of 2019, 1.94%. Third quarter, 2.28%, as you can see here. Q4, 2.5% growth. And this 2.5% growth in 2019 was the strongest since 2016 recession. So since 2016, Nigeria experiencing a growth of 2.5% was the strongest growth since 2016 recession. The overall growth for 2019 came in at 2.27%. Now let's move over to 2020. Yes, 1.87%, you can see that. Then we plunged into another recession in 2020, and that was the COVID-19 induced recession when the whole world was on a lockdown. You can see a very sharp decline, 6.10% here in Q2, Q3 3.62%, Q4 0.11%. In the whole of the story that I'm talking about, we've seen a sharp decline of oil production in terms of volume. In 2020, first quarter, second quarter, oil prices came down. In fact, it was almost nearly a zero. The whole world was also on a lockdown. Don't also forget that Nigeria closed its border in 2019, the later end of 2019. So in the whole of 2020, of course, our border was closed. There was a lockdown. And you can see the sharp decline of GDP growth, negative growth actually for 2020. Now let's move over to 2021 and see where the story actually changed. The story of Nigeria's GDP changed in the Q4 of 2020. The last quarter of 2020, we experienced a 0.11% growth. And then I remember the Central Bank of Nigeria did forecast that Nigeria's economy will grow in the fourth quarter, bearing in mind that in the previous 2 quarters where we were on a lockdown, many interventions came, the real sector facility, healthcare sector facility, COVID-19 loans, and all of that. There's also been arguments that the central bank is doing so much, but that's a discussion for another day. Now, this improvements that we saw from the recession of 2020 continued in the first quarter of 2021, half of 1%. Now, the strongest growth that we've seen so far, if I'm not mistaken, since President Muhammadu Buhari became president, at least I don't know when he will go in May. It's a matter of what's the data telling us. We're seeing a 5.01% GDP growth rate, and that we witnessed in 2021. A lot of economists will say why we saw that sharp increase in GDP growth rates is due to base effects, because at least the rest of the world were opening up and we saw economic activities kicking back in. So Q3, 4.03%, Q4, 3.98%. Then, okay, let me go back to this place. Q2, how can I forget? In fact, this was the only place that I noticed that President Muhammadu Buhari spoke, where GDP numbers came in at 5.01%. That, oh, okay, you know, commended our GDP growth and all of that. I can't remember any time. I could be mistaken, but this was the only time. Now, Q1 and Q2 of 2022, the prints coming in at 3.11%, first quarter of this year, 3.54% from the April to June quarter. So this is really the story of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration in the last, how many years? 7.5 years from 2015. Why I'm taking my time to do this analysis this morning is that 2023 elections are almost here. If you need to do it, snap it right now on your TV set, get this data. This is what you will really be using to ask the right questions among the political candidates. That is, even if they know how the economy has fared. If the APC is saying, vote us again, this is your report card, this is your scorecard. Can we do better than this? If the PDP is saying, vote us, this is what the APC has done, can you do better than that? How will you do better? What will instigate the improvement? Those are the kind of questions that you should be asking. Peter Obi's Labour Party, these are the numbers. What are you saying? From production or consumption to production. What sectors will you involve production, or would production be involved in? What are the sectors that are driving all those numbers? So these are not just numbers. These are also people. These are work. Because what is GDP numbers is a matter of, is the economic health and the economic outputs, what you do and what I do sums the score. So I hope this analysis has given you an idea of where Nigeria's economy is so far. I don't have my crystal ball. Can I look? Okay, what I'm seeing is that we need to do better than we're doing right now. And Nigeria cannot afford this trajectory. 2023, it's a critical year in our nation's history. All right, let's move over to other business news quickly. Our data from the National Bureau of Statistics has shown that the federal government received 1.09 trillion naira from indirect taxes in the first full quarters of 2022. This represents a 10.29% increase from 984.33 billion naira obtained in the first two quarters of 2021. Indirect taxes, which are calculated using current basic prices, are taxes paid to the government by a producer or retailer and then passed on to the customer. They include value-added taxes, customs or import duties, among others. The foreign exchange and fuel problems that have ravaged the aviation sector appear to have resulted in a 61.47% decrease in the sector's contribution to GDP. According to the latest Q2 2022 GDP data from the National Bureau of Statistics, the nominal GDP output of the sector crashed from 84.73 billion naira in the first quarter of 2022 to 32.65 billion naira by the second quarter of the year. In a bid to drive economic growth, stability, and investment, as well as security in the sports sector, Toyin Bitoye, press attaché, Team Nigeria 2022 Commonwealth Games, expressed that the private sector would be willing to fund the sports sector if only it provides optimal performance and yield dividends. This, however, can only be facilitated by lucrative government policies. Take a listen.
Truth is, the private sector will be willing to fund and provide some of the resources we're talking about for our sports development, grassroots sports development, if they are also making profits, if they are in business and they are surviving and they are not struggling. It's when you are not struggling and you have some extra that you can begin to think about.
That's when the business environment is friendly.
When the business environment is friendly, which is why I hope we are able to drive this sports industry policy over the line, and then create that environment for them to be confident that whatever they are involved in, whatever they do with sports, has some benefits for them. That industry policy is pegged on, incentives for those who are going to be investing in sports. Is also based on providing infrastructure, and it's also providing. It's also, those are some of the pegs for the industry policy.
The Director of Trade and Exchange Department at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Ezomena Nnaji, has revealed that diaspora remittances through the Naira for Dollar scheme stood at $2.4 billion in the first 8 months of 2022. She noted that inflow has been strong, pointing out that in the entire 2021, remittances recorded through the scheme were a total of $2.9 billion. Whereas 8 months into 2022, Nigeria has already recorded $2.4 billion. As she disclosed this at the weekend at the 33rd Seminar for Finance Correspondents and Business Editors. Fares in the domestic sector of air travel have risen by over 200% in the last 1 year. Ticket prices for travel on major routes, Lagos to Abuja, we sold for between 35,000 naira and 50,000 naira last year, are on offer for between 80,000 and 96,000 naira. Ticket prices on the Lagos-Port Harcourt route, which hovered in the neighborhoods of between 35,000 naira and 40,000 naira, are selling between 88,000 naira and 90,000 naira currently. To further expedite growth and raise economic opportunities in Nigeria, Shubham Shaduri, World Bank Country Director, discussed the SABA program, which will multiply the growth of less development states, focus on poverty alleviation, spur social and economic development, and improve the livelihoods of millions of Nigerians. Take a listen.
No country has eliminated poverty without private investment and job creation, basically giving millions of people the opportunities for better paying, higher value added jobs, right? So what the SABRE program, the idea behind it is to say, look, what are all the things that states can do to actually make it easier for private businesses to set up, to grow, to create jobs and kind of offer real better paying jobs, economic opportunities for all the millions of young Nigerians. Right? And the results will be seen in terms of, okay, does this mean that they're able to attract more private investment? To, the costs of, the fiber optic, coverage, connectivity increases. Land is allocated more transparently. More certificates of occupancy are issued, including to female entrepreneurs.
The Central Bank of Nigeria late Friday says that it has disbursed $265 million to domestic airlines in order to clear unclaimed revenue from ticket sales. It was stated in a statement by the bank's corporate communications director, Ositawani Siobi, that the Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele and his team are concerned about the inability of airlines to repatriate their funds from Nigeria and what it portends for the industry, travelers, and the nation at large. All right, that's it. Let's quickly take a break. And when we return from the break, it will be time for us to get into the conversation for today. We're looking at businesses, the response of businesses to tough economic times. My guest will be joining me shortly, Olusegun Zaccheaus, who is the partner and lead West African market strategy and part of the PwC network. He will be joining me after the break. Join us on all our social media platforms. We'll be right back.
Do you want to live your life financially free? Do you want to take your business to the next level and succeed? Then the time is now. Moneyline with Nancy on AIT presents a free one-day personal and business acceleration masterclass, a live conference geared at revealing top secrets by elite business experts and life coaches in Nigeria on ways to improve yourself, business, and create wealth. Date, Saturday, 17 September 2022. Venue, Nigerian Export Promotion Council, Maitama, Abuja. Time, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Attendance is free. Visit our social media handles to register: Instagram and Facebook at Moneyline with Nancy TV, Twitter at Moneyline TV.
For more inquiries and sponsorship, contact 0814 833 9088 or 0906 691 2600
or email us at info@moneylinewithnancy.com. Proudly supported by Be there.
Hello everyone, I am Nancy Naju. It's been many years of sitting and interacting at this Moneyline with Nancy's table, dissecting, analyzing and profiling solutions to the world's economic problems, most especially in Africa and Nigeria. This table has granted me access to the world's smartest people, technocrats, policymakers, problem solvers, enterprise leaders, and more. This time, I chose not to be alone at the table, but to bring you to a free one-day personal and business acceleration masterclass conference so that you can gain the skills, the knowledge, tools that you need to maximize your business and personal life. You don't want to forge on unequipped and unprepared. Join me and awesome speakers to help prepare and equip you for the next level of growth. You can visit any of our social media platforms to register or scan this QR code. I look forward to welcoming you all. right, welcome back. Joining me right now is Olusegun Zaccheaus, who is a partner and lead at West African Market Strategy and part of the PwC network. Hello, Olusegun, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nancy. Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
I'm well. I'm great. I hope you're doing the same too. Now let's get started.
Yes.
Let's get started. We're looking at the responses of business responses to tough economic times. We know it's no gainsaying that we live in challenging times. Earlier on, I had done the GDP analysis, and it really tells us a story of how the economy of Nigeria has been doing. But I really want to ask you, especially you have interfaces with businesses on a regular basis. How tough are these economic times for businesses, really?
Thank you so much, Nancy, for the question. And I'm happy to be here again once more. I think these are very tough times for businesses, right? There are multiple shocks and pressure points that they're dealing with, both from the consumer end, and we've talked about the inflation and the impact. We talked about the broad slowing economic growth, which also has impact on jobs. So from a consumption head, businesses are dealing with that challenges. But the other hand is the supply or the production hand. When you talk about the cost of production, you want to talk about the supply chain challenges, right? These are very tough times for businesses because they have to navigate all these constraints and still be in operations, right? So as I speak to my different clients, the reality is that these are tough times. They have to navigate this head front, to be hopefully get across to the other end of the line. So it's indeed a tough time for all clients across all sectors, in this economic environment that we are in.
Now, Segun, I really want to ask this question because I'm also wondering if tough economic times always spell bad news for businesses, really. Does a tough economy, does it always mean bad news for businesses?
So that's an interesting question, and it can spin it in different ways, right? Sometimes the cup is half empty, or the cup can be seen as being half full. But generally, tough economic times for businesses that are not prepared, that do not have the right strategy to respond to the challenges, could be hit really hard, right? But the other bit is that businesses that are agile, right, that can potentially spot new opportunities that can be linked to the hard time, can also explore those opportunities and sort of use that to sort of grow their business and their revenues and all that. And we've seen this happen severally. During the COVID era, it was a high economic pressure point. And I heard you alluding to lower GDP growth during that era. But we've seen businesses that have sort of leveraged the challenges of COVID to sort of review their business operating model and their production line, and have moved production from their primary product to new type of product like sanitizer, etc. Right? So it's different stroke for different folks, right? So it depends on how responsive the business is to the challenges, how they are proactive in sort of putting together a strategy that they can use to respond during the tough times. Obviously, businesses that are naturally vulnerable, right, I get it really hard. And typically what they all try to do is to just keep acting, and just try to begin to cut costs immediately while not thinking deeply and strategic about how to manage tough times. So I think the question around the tough times is tough, right? Businesses that are not well prepared get hit hard. Businesses that are proactive and think deeply about their business and operating model and their strategy are able to respond a lot better and even are able to explore new opportunities within the tough economic environment.
Now, I'm moved to ask if, from what you said, it's either half empty or half full. And what I can also get from what you're saying is that it also depends on the sectors which you are playing. But I really want to ask if, like the question I asked earlier, if business growth is really possible in tough times, do we see business growth possible in tough times for the non-cyclical sectors? Those are like the sectors that really do well even when the economy is not doing well, so to speak. So do we have growth or more growth in those sectors as against cyclical sectors?
Thanks. That's an interesting question. And maybe when we step back a bit and try to ask the question, what are the key indicators of tough times, right? There are two big dimensions you can look at, right? You can look at high inflation, right? High inflation really reflects that, look, consumers' power to purchase is being eroded by higher prices, right? And if there's an erosion of consumer purchasing power, obviously everything around consumption and purchasing reduces, and production from firms and companies will reduce. So if we take Nigeria as an example, where 57% of our consumption spend is on food, right? Anything that sort of affects, the overall ability of the consumer to sort of consume, affect every other non-food items, which some of can be termed as discretionary, right? So if we structure it from that angle, from inflation, that's one end. The other bit you should look at it is our slow economic growth, right? Which really reflects slow in economic activities, slow in production activities across different sectors of the economy. So if we take those two dimensions and sort of look at the economic sectors, you realize that sectors that are closely linked to consumption, like food, beverages, and manufacturing, are supposed to sort of continue to perform fairly well because they'll still be spending on food, which is the basic need every human being has, right? But when you then begin to move out from the core consumption-related industry to industry that are discretionary, right? And when you begin to talk about services, right, maybe going to a hotel is something discretionary. When there's economic downtime, when there's high inflation, people will do that less, right? So sectors like that also would be negatively impacted by tough economic times, right? But it also depends on the maturity of the economy, right? Because if you go to advanced economy where services remain very core to them, right? This may not be as affected as we will see in the developing economy like Nigeria. But there are other angles to this, right? Because if you look at the overall wealth of Nigeria, I realize that, look, we have low income consumer. This generally will affect the overall spend within the economy. So to answer your question directly, right, some sectors get hit much more than the other. Some sectors are expected to be counter-cyclical, right? But sectors that will always go well, no matter how hard or how high pressure the economies will be, the food, consumer goods, while services sector, like give an example, will really be negatively impacted, when you have tough economic situation like we're in right now. Yeah.
What is your own analysis to the 39 million businesses that we have in Nigeria right now, as released by the NBS? That's the current data that we have for businesses in Nigeria, both nano, small, medium, and big businesses, so to speak. It fell from 41.6 million businesses to 39 million businesses. So what's your analysis on the import of what we're talking about now? Bearing in mind that a majority of that 39 million businesses are micro or even nano, where you have it's like one-man business. So this tough economic times that we're talking about, how is it affecting the 39 million businesses in Nigeria?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, for the question. If you sort of look at the economic structure of a country like Nigeria, you realize that from stats, says like close to 50% is from informal sector, which will be filled with some of the SMEs, and the smaller businesses that we have, right? So if we then sort of dimension the businesses from size perspective, which is what stats will use to sort of dimension, you realize that for smaller businesses it's more difficult for them. And if you ask me why, right? For smaller businesses, micro businesses, nano businesses, there's a couple of features that makes them more vulnerable to shocks. For example, access to funding, right? And one of the impact of negative economic development is a pressure on your cash as a business, because really you're not selling as much as you should sell normally, and you're not sort of getting any sort of support from anywhere, right? So when you don't sell, you don't have cash. So you definitely will need some sort of support from bank, to help, to help you mitigate or to help you navigate that period. But given the fact that we have challenges of access to finance in Nigeria, especially for small businesses, they are more vulnerable to get out of a business if they don't have access to this cash, if they're not selling as much as they should, right? Their operations is negatively impacted, and a lot of them pack up as quickly, as just a snap of the finger. But when you then compare this to more developed businesses, emerging corporate and corporate, right? Because they're a bit more structured, a few of them have strategies to sort of put in place to navigate of economic situation. A number of them have sort of developed advanced capability to manage their working capital, to manage the cash in the business. And a few of them already have funding lines, though the interest rate may be higher, right? But these have some sort of funding line that can help them, right, to sort of navigate the situation, So the impact, is disproportionately on the smaller businesses, right? And a lot of them just pack up a lot more faster, during tough economic situation than when you compare to larger businesses.
What actions should a business take during times of high inflation, as we're seeing right now? We do know that for every business is a bit different, but are there general actions that businesses can really take to maximize their potential to reach prosperity? Because we also do know, I think it's the Chinese that say in every crisis there's an opportunity. So even in an inflationary environment, some people can also be, smiling to the bank. There's the good and the bad of it. But what actions can generally business take? You can look at the small businesses, then we also take a look at the big businesses because they may really differ in context.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, right? And I think for me, the way I will sort of frame this is that there are 3 steps you need to really consider and sort of understand your position as a business. Are you at a survival point? Are you at a point you need to sustain your business? Or are you at a point you need to drive for growth, right? I think the first stage when you're in the period of economic crisis is to ensure that your business can actually survive, right? And what are the factors you consider for survival? Do you have enough cash in the business to carry you for a period of 3-6 months, depends on your runway as a business, right? Are you going to be able to generate enough revenue, right, to be able to continue to run your business? Those are the kind of questions you ask for survival. If you can't answer those questions with definite, answer, if I will rephrase that, one of the things you need to do is to begin to think about how you can proactively manage your cost, right? I won't use the word cost cutting, right? Because that sounds like you're just going to axe down the cost, right? It's just taking a view or strategic approach to your cost management. Understand what are your costs across your value chain, from your procurement to your production to your sales, and try to identify areas that you can sort of remove cost in a way that your operations is not negatively affected. So you take a strategic view of your cost cutting, right? And obviously, as you're costing cuts for today, you must also reflect on what you need to grow in the future. In the season of recovery, you need to put that into significant consideration. That's one area in which businesses can consider when you're going through tough time like this. Another bit, right, is really looking at how you play in the market, how you leverage your pricing, to play in the market. One of the things that happens is that in a period of high inflation, specifically, you have higher input costs, right? And what you typically will do as a business, both small and large businesses, to transmit that cost to your customer. Obviously, when you transmit that cost, because your customer's income has not increased, so the ability to afford your product reduces. So instead of just transmitting the higher input cost directly or immediately to your customers, you need to be very strategic about the approach that you take. Try to understand which customers are quantity sensitive, which customers are quality sensitive, really understanding the nature of your customer, then using that to change the way you sort of deliver your product. And we've seen some of this in the market. And I'm sure if you go to the supermarket to buy some of this product within, packed in sachets, you realize of a number of them, their quantity has reduced, but their price stayed the same. That's their own strategy of sort of passing down the cost without necessarily increasing the price. So having a more nuanced approach to the way you look at your pricing, and you look at your product, right, in the market will also help. Another key point is to introduce newer strategy like bulk discounts, which sort of allow you to sell a lot more, right, at a relatively lower price, but you are sort of achieving some sort of revenue in your business to cover your cost as a business, right? So that's another area that business must sort of look at, right, as they navigate this period. And this applies to both, big businesses and small businesses at different areas, right? But if you then sort of go a bit more into this detail to say, so what are the big things you can do, especially for big businesses? There are a couple of actions that you can take. The first one is what you call rationalization, right? And rationalization can be applied to different elements of your business. For example, if you have too many multiple products that may be overlapping in the market, one of the things you can do is to sort of streamline the number of products you have so that the cost of those products is reduced and you can have scale on a fewer number of products, right? I think that's really very, very important for you to consider, especially for big businesses, right? I think the other bit you also need to consider is what you call elimination. You just sort of look at what you do across your business, right? And ask the question, what can I eliminate, right? What activities do I conduct inside my operations that do not directly add value to the final product? Which activity can I outsource, right? And an example you can think about is that you look at all the logistics firms that we have quite a lot, of operating now. So why will you run your logistics? Why will you be buying trucks, etc., where you can outsource that and you can pay per use rather than sort of carrying the entire cost of a logistic, operation within your business, right? That's another example. I think another quick point I'll just sort of highlight that we can really consider is really sort of finding a more proactive way to manage your cash. And it's a lot of activities. One, you're going back to all the parties that you have contract with, you are finding a way to negotiate the contract. You are looking at your payment circle as a business, right? And you're sort of finding a way to tune it in a way that you can retain more cash within your business. You're not then just stopping at that. You're looking at how you collect from what we call your receivables for people are owing you. You're trying to collect a lot faster, much more, than you'll have done in normal, business times, right? So these are some of the tips that businesses must consider to navigate the high inflation environment, right? Sort of optimizing their costs, right, in a very strategic way, finding ways to sort of optimize the way they price their product, not just transmitting all the higher costs, to consumer, right? And so sort of fine-tuning your cash management as a business.
Segun, did you smartly avoid the issue of perhaps rationalization of employees or staff in terms of cutting costs? Because I didn't hear that. Is it deliberate?
That's a tricky situation, right? And then I'll respond to it this way. We're in a period in which quality talent is lacking, right? And we know of several syndrome of Jackpot syndrome, where you're losing your quality talent, right? And but we still have quantity, because it's ironic, because we have high level of unemployment, right? So we have a challenge of quality, right? Obviously, in terms of streamlining, there needs to be a lot of thinking through, because talent is rare to find on the market, as you know, right? And for us, as we speak to our client, we try to look out for other sources of sort of optimizing their business, optimizing their costs, not starting with talent. Obviously, you will consider talent, but thinking through that needs to be deep and strategic, because you need to balance the availability of talent, right, with the cost optimization you want to do. Because after these difficult times, there's still going to be a season of recovery where you need your talent to drive, right? So that's why I was a bit, quiet around it. And it's not a first place I would start really as a business. Yeah.
So it was nice that I picked that up. So you deliberately omitted that. I don't know if I should also ask this question, because you've just said it's wise at this time perhaps to keep the talent, because if a business is really suffering tough times, the question is, if you also want to keep the talent, do you also reduce their wages or their salaries? Bearing in mind that the businesses are not even making money, instead of allowing the staff to go. But how do you now balance allowing the staff to go because the businesses are not making money, and the question of wage is not increasing? you know, question of wages not increasing, and those wages or salaries are the same monies that consumers or the workers used to go to the market, and it buys less things for them. So it's a very tricky situation at this point. Which should you choose, the chicken or the egg? Because a business has to survive. A business even has to exist, let alone paying workers at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Naz. That's an interesting point. And you said it's a difficult, decision when you come to talk about silence in this kind of environment that we are right now, right? But there are a couple of things to consider, right? And as I said, businesses should not brashly, just cut costs, right? Obviously, business needs to think through the entire value chain, look at their strategy, and use that to inform the decisions on how to optimize their cost. And as I said, there's several areas to look at, including talent, right? Then when it comes to talent, and the couple of points, right, that you need to consider. One is, look, if you're having a tough time right now, are there other strategic ways to minimize the involvement of the talent, while still retaining them, right? There are methods like work from home, putting people on some sort of contract, and sort of devising creative ways to ensure you retain them while probably minimizing your cost of employment. That's one way to sort of look at, for businesses to consider. The other bit to really think about, and you alluded to it around wage increase and all that, that's a very delicate, point, right now, and I got your point. Inflation is high. Typically, wage should follow to sort of compensate for what you're seeing in the market. But obviously, you also know that businesses broadly are facing tough times, right? And making decisions around wage increase as a basis to retain talent must be strategic, must be sequenced, must be done in a way that is sustainable. So it also depends on the phase and the stage of positioning of the business. Is the business, focused on survival, or are they sustaining, or are they in a position they can drive for growth? If you're in a survival phase here, your decision has to be very firm to ensure the business survives at the end of the day. But if you want to sustain your business, right, I think you need to be a bit more conservative, ensuring that you have the quality talent that will help you drive the future growth, to run your business, right? So it depends on the position of each of the business, in making final decision on some of these critical things. And a lot of deep thinking for each business is required for business to be able to make those final decisions. But I think my major advice is that no business should make a brash or a coy cost-cutting decision, and it needs to be thought through. You need to reflect on where you are now, where you would like to be in the next 3 years, and sort of have a comprehensive view of what you need to navigate period like this.
Okay, 2 questions before we go, and those 2 questions, Shego, please, if you can answer them in 3 minutes. The challenges before business executives and even business leaders right now, business owners, business executives at this point. I know you've been alluding to it one way or the other in what you've been saying, but are there some strategic tips that you want to give business executives? Because we're seeing that the challenge is there now, just like we saw during COVID. It was so tough for business executives at that point. The second question is, this inflation we're talking about, the inflation psychology, especially from consumers now, do you see it changing? Because the inflation psychology of consumers, if it changes, that means perhaps the businesses will do better, so to speak.
Thanks for the question. And let me start from the last one, right? At least as a last time, we're still in Nigeria, where inflation begin to do a lot more of that, because people will sort of reflect on what they hear as the fuel price gone up, as the cost of transportation gone up, and they sort of make their decision on it. I think that on inflation, there are a couple of fundamentals that need to be dealt with. We know central bank has done some work around increasing interest rate. Obviously, the transmission of monetary policy to the real sector in Nigeria, I don't think it's clear. I don't think the link has been certainly established, right? So we'll see how that play out. Obviously, there's a lot of money in circulation, and I know the higher interest rate will potentially sort of reduce, and the money in circulation. But the challenge is that when your inflation is cost push, is coming from the supply chain, is coming from the other end, it's also difficult for the monetary policy to have significant impact if those bottlenecks creating the inflation are not dealt with. So obviously, inflation psychology will be high because the bottlenecks still remain, and until those bottlenecks are eased, right, inflation will still be a point to deal with, right? That would be my comment on your first point. On your second point, on the first question, I think a couple of stay awake, issues that executives are dealing with, from the macro pressure point, which we've talked extensively about, and you've also shown the GDP numbers. The issue around talent, which I sort of also we've sort of discussed, like to even how do we embrace digital to sort of help us deal, with our business, right? How do I leverage automation to help me reduce cost of business, etc. That's part of the executives are dealing with, right? I think for me, if I were to give three, broad points around this, I think the first thing for me is a question of, I'll call it courage, right? I think tough times require executives to be courageous. They need to make certain decisions at points like this, and that will enhance survival, sustaining, or even drive future growth, right? Are there investments that you need to make now in your digital transformation as a business? You need to buy the bullet and make the investment so that you can reap the benefit in the future. I think that for me is very important. And the second point is executives having clarity, right? I think while the future is unclear, while executives need to consider scenarios as they think about their strategies or what they want to do in the next few years. And I think there has to be a few bets, the executive must have, over the next 3 years, that they're going to sort of have clarity on and continue to run their business, with the aim to achieve.
Okay.
Right. I think the last bit is around customer, right? Customer and clients are still king, and they still bring revenues to the business. And I think executives need to continue to pay attention to how those customers are dealt with, how we satisfy their need, how we don't chase them, with higher prices, if I use that word, and
okay.
sort of we're very nuanced in the way we deal with our customers.
Thank you very much, Segun, for your insights this morning. Very wonderful insights. Thank you very much, Segun. I'll talk to you soon. All right, I've been speaking with Segun Zaccheaus, who is a partner and lead West African market strategy and part of the PwC network. We've been looking at businesses' responses to tough times, and I hope as a business owner you've been able to take one or two nuggets out. I'll see you all again tomorrow, same time on this station. Moneyline with Nancy it is. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be that change that you want to see. Bye now.